There are Dad's insurance papers. You know you put them somewhere. And this is the third time you've had to tear the house apart looking for something important. Between the endless phone calls and doctor's appointments, just trying to keep Dad safe and comfortable, do you feel like you're drowning? And honestly, is the financial side of caregiving terrifying as well? Dementia caregiving can take a huge toll, not just emotionally, but financially. And you're not the only one facing these challenges. In this episode, we'll discuss the financial realities of dementia caregiving and explore some strategies to help you navigate this difficult journey. So let's face financial planning for caregivers together. Welcome back, listeners. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Jen Fink, your host. We are talking about financial planning for caregivers. And for those of you who have been around for a long time, you will know that I have never talked to a financial planner because in the world of finances, things change rapidly and there are laws. And so they've never felt comfortable. So I am so glad that Danielle Mila from Spark Financial, did I get that part right?
Spark Financials.
Hey, considering I briefly saw the name, I did good. She's here to talk about financial planning for caregivers. So thanks for joining me, Danielle.
Thank you for having me as a longtime listener, and I feel honored to be here with you.
Well, thank you for being the first financial planner in almost 400 episodes.
I know, isn't that crazy?
I've had personal financial planners in my life, and they're like, "Oh, I'd love to. Oh, my compliance people won't allow me to." I'm like, that's what I think of your compliance people. And I get it. You know, I'm in California. This podcast goes nationwide and globally, so we're just going to keep it to caregiving, right? So that we don't tell people the wrong thing. So why don't you tell me?
We won't be telling anybody the wrong thing. We'll be sharing our stories and sharing our advice. Starting with, I did a video series recently. Actually, Jennifer was on it. Thank you to her. Talking about the financial toll of caregiving. I loved hearing all the voices of all the current family caregivers and former caregivers talking about the effect that caregiving took on them financially.
I always felt lucky. My dad was super frugal to the point of being cheap sometimes. I'm the same way, so I can say that. And he had investments. My parents' house was paid for because they bought it in 1970. And for those of you who live in California, they had Prop 13 property taxes. So his property taxes for the year were equivalent to mine for a month. So, there was a lot of benefits. When he passed away, we were going to sell Mom's house, which is what most people do. My husband is a property manager and a real estate broker. And this is why having other people in your life, other advisors in your life is important, because a CPA friend of ours went, "Hold up, your mother-in-law's house is paid for? You need to rent it out." And then, because my mom was 74 at the time and she could have easily lived for another 15 years, and she probably would have been fine had we sold it, but obviously renting it out and selling her house during COVID was financially beneficial. So I always felt blessed that I did not have to worry about her having enough money. But I am self-employed. I was doing the podcast and my photography at the same time and juggling her care and all that goes with it. And it just got to be too much. And I gave up photography during the pandemic. But I can say that. Mostly because I got tired of telling people why they needed me, even though the iPhone takes nice portraits. It's like the phone does, you don't. And now I'm trying to build up an entirely different career at 58 years old, and it's taking too long. So that's kind of my backstory. I never really felt financially burdened, but I always stressed about Mom running out of money, even though that really wasn't an option. We would have had to really work hard to spend all her money with the house because, California real estate. What is your caregiving story?
Yeah, I just wanted to start with talking about some of the things you mentioned. One of the things that caregivers that I've found, there's a lot of decisions we have to make, especially financial decisions, and can be very overwhelming. And I love that you mentioned that you reached out to professionals, having a team that can at least back you up and say, this is a smart decision, or this is, there's other options available to you, because it can be overwhelming and we can get decision fatigue so
Definitely.
quickly. Like, we're managing medical decisions, we're managing financial decisions, we're managing our own self-care and our own financial decisions on that factor. Like, that's a lot to handle. Um, to start off with my story, I at 25, I was moving closer to home, as many people did during the pandemic, and moving closer to family in hopes that I would have free babysitters of my parents. Um, and then my grandmother fell on tile floor about a month after we moved in. I really say that it's like the fall is all it takes. One fall completely changed my life. Whether I liked it or not, that was my first day as a family caregiver. I totally didn't dismissed the term family caregiver as many people do. I
Yep.
just thought, this is my responsibility as a family member to take care of someone I love and who gave back to me when I was growing up, and I need to, in return, fill back their cup. And it wasn't until I started experiencing caregiver burnout and being a caregiver to multiple people, which I still thought I was a family member to those people, um, that I started to realize this is way more than just a family member. This is a family caregiver. Nobody goes to this extreme of a extent for just the responsibilities of a family member.
Yep. I was the same way. My dad passed away in March of 2017. I became responsible for mom. I did not consider myself a caregiver because my mom was in memory care. So I was like, hey, I'm lucky. Yeah, my mom has Alzheimer's, but hey, thank God she didn't move in with me. That is a whole other episode that I have done on choosing memory care. Her living with me would have been horrible for everybody involved. Her dog, my dogs, me would just no. Bad move. Memory care was great for her. So I'm like, I can't complain. I'm lucky, right? She's got money. She's in memory care. Like, what am I complaining about? It wasn't until I went to my first Alzheimer's caregiver support group that the facilitator said it doesn't matter if your family members in memory care, living with you, living in their own home, wherever. If you're doing these kinds of things, you're a caregiver. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm a caregiver. So I actually have a not so distant episode on intermittent caregiving. It's called "Are You a Caregiver Without Knowing It?" And the week that that episode came out, I was networking with a gentleman from a real estate company and his assistant. Her husband's grandmother has Alzheimer's, and I asked her, "Oh, are you guys helping out?" And she goes, "No, da 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 da." And then later on, I said, "Have you done X, Y, and Z for grandma?" She said, "Oh yeah, sometimes we do that." I'm like, "Guess what? You're a passive caregiver or an intermittent caregiver. Same phrase, different title for the same thing." And she's like, "Oh yeah, you're probably right." And then I explained why that label is important, because if you don't think of yourself as a caregiver, you probably won't reach out to caregiver resources like Danielle or myself, or all the other places without, without that label. Like a lot of people like, why do I have to label it? That's why. Because there's more support when you realize this is what you're doing. So that's
Yeah,
he and I both had
like starting a job without a job description.
for a paycheck.
I think it's like, who do I go? Oh, I need to go to HR. Like, oh, I need to go to these resources. It's almost like scary. It's like you're coming into a position that you're not familiar with, totally blinded. And that's what I often find with people who think about caregiving in the financial industry. We plan for long-term care, and maybe that long-term care is something. Many people don't plan for long-term care.
Nope.
It's not, even if they have a financial advisor, the financial advisor doesn't, either one, doesn't do it at all, Two, it's very basic. It's like plugging numbers into a software and telling you how much you need for long-term care. And three, if you're lucky, someone will make a detailed plan for you. And it's just disappointing to see an industry that values retirement so much, but doesn't include long-term care. It's like, how can you sustain your retirement without putting a plan for long-term care, a detailed plan that's going to prepare you for unexpected events? And the other thing we definitely do not plan for is caregiving.
No kidding.
Think about, yeah, it's like we plan for long-term care, but we don't plan at all for caregiving planning. We don't plan for what may happen if your child becomes premature or is living with disabilities. We don't plan for an aging loved one who needs some more support than we expect. We don't plan for sabbaticals or time off of work to care for someone or improve our self-care. These are things that are not, I would say, less than 1% of advisors actually plan for it. And it's sad.
Are you familiar with the statistic that 70% of us will need care before we die?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
face that one all the time, and then I back that up with, and please don't have the Pollyanna attitude that you're going to be in that 30%, because that's people who die suddenly, die young. You know, the few people who manage to live to a pretty ripe old age without needing caregiving. My paternal grandmother lived to 103, but she had glaucoma. And in 2005, damaged the eye with the best sight. So from pretty much from 2005 to 2021, a long haul, she needed assistance. You know, it's hard to cook when you're blind. You can't drive to the hairdresser every week or the doctor or any of those things. And she really burned out my aunt. When my grandmother died, I fully expected my aunt and uncle to flee California to Idaho, where their younger daughter and 4 grandchildren are. And my aunt said, we can't do that because my uncle was not healthy enough. And he passed away February of 24. Oh, that seems like a lot longer ago than it was. And it's like, you know, there's nothing wrong with her except she couldn't see very well. And she had money. She could have paid for the best caregivers, even though even that's challenging. So, do you think that financial planners, I know why people like us, like I'm 58, we haven't planned enough for long-term care. So, we're guilty, but a lot of it's just, you know, self-employed and there's only so many ways your money can go. But do you think it's still because society just sort of expects family to do for family? That's why we don't plan?
that's a great question. I think it's a mixture of one, I think people just try to avoid it as much as possible. Like people try to avoid death. What is it? The 3 Ds: disability, death, and divorce. It's like, if I can avoid it as much as possible, then like I don't want to do it. I'd rather not touch upon it. I'd rather not talk about it. It's just not a fun topic. Like, if I were to ask you, which I'm putting you on the spot, is like, what's stopping you from creating your long-term care plan?
Well, we have a trust. And the biggest reason for not having like money set aside for long-term care was we didn't start soon enough to make it affordable, and to self-employed people with California mortgages make that even more difficult. So, I mean, we've lived through the Great Recession, which I busted my tail to pay for my daughter's college. At least I paid for half of it. She's still got student loans, and managed to keep the household afloat. So, you know, there's only so many ways to stretch a dollar. And trust me, I'm real good at stretching dollars. And it's a little scary because we downsized and we sold our single story, wide hallway home that would have been perfect for aging in place, except it was huge. And the mortgage was really not fun. To now we have a house where most of the living space is on the main floor, but my office is downstairs, which is very cold, even in the summer. So it's like, but we've also known that this is the last house before death or assisted living. So that conversation has happened. I don't know how we'd afford it at this point, but we'll figure that out. Like the rest of the world. Sell the house, rent it out. Actually, we could rent it out for a pretty good price. So we'd probably be okay that way, but it's a risk that it scares me sometimes because it's like, man, should have, I wish I'd known when I was 30, when my mom started showing signs of Alzheimer's, what I should have been doing way back then. But again, self-employed, so that's my biggest challenge for a lot of things.
Yeah, we make decisions based on the information that we know.
Yep.
And it seems like a lot of your life, that's what you did. You made the best choices with the cards you were given, with the love and support of others. And I'm really grateful there's people like you sharing their stories, because hopefully that will move people mountains. That will help people advocate more for this field, help financial planners be better financial planners. Like, if you're not going after this episode, talking to your financial advisor, asking them to create a long-term care plan, this is your time. This is the podcast to do it.
Yeah.
Is to reach out to someone who can support you, to ask your advisor what they can do to help you with this. Because it seems like, based on what you said, you've been having conversations about what long-term care would look like. But the step further would be, if X and Y, Z happens, this is how we're going to plan. If I fall, a lot of what if scenarios, if I fall and need long-term care, how long will it last? Are we going to receive government aid? Do we fall within those requirements or qualifications to receive government aid? What things in our community are available to us? Can Sally down the block help us with maybe a meal chain? Can the senior community help and provide extra support to us? Maybe we do adult daycare during the day, and then we take care of ourselves during night. So, as you know, there's so much different opportunities to really have those long-term care wishes solidified. And it seems like you're starting to have those conversations. It seems that now is the opportunity to take a step further and find out what your plan is. But I could be totally wrong, so please.
No, but I think I agree with you. And I never thought of, well, I always think of adult day programs for people with cognitive issues, but our senior center is pretty nice. So they do a lot of things. And it's not that far. I don't know that they have transportation, but yeah, no, it's like you're giving me food for thought. So that's good because we moved to a new location. I knew lots of people and lots of resources in my hometown, but up here I'm still learning. So this is a good opportunity to learn more and find out what other resources are available. I do have lots of contacts, so I would not be as challenged as a typical caregiver, just because I've talked to hundreds of people like yourself. And I refer to myself as a professional volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association, because you must know, if you listen, that I do a support group. I'm a legislative advocate and a community educator. So I hope they don't have any. Well, they do have other volunteering opportunities for which I run away every time they ask me about.
Why I'm so passionate about talking about this, and why I feel bad for putting you on the spot, is that what I'm seeing is kind of a rotating cycle. And I'm in it myself. I'm in the rotating cycle of, I started caregiving when I was young. And at that time, I already had a child. So having a child or not having a child was not a decision, because I was automatically fit into the sandwich generation cycle. And due to that cycle, I became a family caregiver to my grandmother, as I said. And I also had to dip into savings to take care of my grandmother. I wasn't responsible for paying for any care costs, but I was responsible for my daily living expenses. And since at that time, I could not be paid as a family caregiver, or I didn't advocate for myself to set up a care agreement, um, I dipped into savings. That was the choice that I made at the time to care for her because I loved her so much. And now I have this next cycle where what do we do with the next generation?
Mhm.
Now my daughter, who my husband and I are both only children, now we're looking at what is it like to care for our parents? And what is it like? What do we want this care journey to be different this time? And how can we prepare them so that we don't feel as much of the heavy load that we experienced before, taking it as a learning opportunity. But then also we have a next cycle of the next generation. Sorry, it's like we're going from grandma generation, parent generation. Now I'm going to my child, my child who's an only child, who is a child of two only children. So we don't have like an extended family or, uncles or aunts she can rely on. It's just going to be her. And now I got to figure out, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to prepare so that the load isn't carried on to her and the next generation that proceeds, if that's what her choice is. And that's what I'm seeing is this really bad cycle of, if you're not preparing financially, someone has to pick up the pieces for you. And who's going to pick up the pieces? And that's why it's so important that we as family caregivers, we as advocates, we as allies, we don't expect just the minimum anymore. We can't just expect the minimum. We have to go out there like you, Jennifer, and advocate for family caregivers, advocate for bills that will protect the next generation. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I'm doing, because I don't want my daughter to be in the same situation that we were in, that we experienced, because I can't control when I need long-term care, but I can control how I prepare for it.
I'm doing my best to not need long-term care because my husband's an only child. I'm estranged from my sister and a lot of my mom's family through her. And my daughter is an only child who has an autoimmune disease, and stress exacerbates her disease. So, it's her and her husband and me and my husband, and that's about it. So that is why brain health and physical health is a massive part of my daily to-do list. I have somebody that was like, "Hey," I specifically emailed them. They're like, "Throw out some dates and times that we can meet." And I said, "I'm in California. I prefer to meet late morning throughout the day. Late morning meaning 10:30." So she's like, "How about 11 a.m. Eastern?" Could you get any further from 10:30 in the morning? 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm not dressed. I'm outside on the Peloton or walking the dog or something. And I'm like, that's really early for me, but I can make it work if I have to, because it's important. It's an important meeting. At least I'm hoping it's going to be important. But yeah, I don't deviate from my workout schedule. That is as important as eating breakfast. Okay, I cannot start my day on the right foot if I don't have breakfast and some tea and my workout. That's
Uh,
my long-term care plan right now.
No, I think it's great. I think it's a component, just like when we think about how to plan for caregiving. We're thinking about the financial side. We're thinking about the self-care. A lot of people think self-care is just like something you automatically have when like you're born with or something like that. But it's a really truly like a skill you build, like the routine that you made for yourself every single morning. That's commitment to yourself, to your health. And a lot of people miss that portion of how important it is to have a daily routine, to exercise, to consider your brain health and your mental wellness.
My mental wellness comes in the evening when I read. And before Danielle and I were recording, I gave her my whole litany of technical issues I've had for the last few weeks. This is back in end of 2024. And one of the things that I started during the pandemic was making handmade greeting cards. And even if I only have 15, 20 minutes, which is not enough time to like get into the mess of making something, I have found that just going through my tools and thinking about like my daughter is not a traditional Christmas person, and so her Christmas cards they're very heartfelt and warm. They're not traditional colors, and that's not necessarily a traditional greeting that you would think of, but it's still very positive and warm and holiday-esque. And so when I didn't have time to actually put what was in my brain and start manipulating with my hands, I would just get out the tools and kind of figure out like, okay, how can I translate the vision in my head into actual reality? And that is amazing how calming and relaxing that can be. It's almost as good as actually sitting down and creating. And for those people who might be new to the show, welcome. Creativity of any sort really fires up all the areas of your brain. And it's also quite meditative, dancing, singing, playing a musical instrument, creating any kind of art. It's all, it all fires up all the aspects of your brain. And it's also a way to relax, which almost sounds counterintuitive. And it's amazing how well that works. And so during these days of, I swear, if I have one more tech issue, I'm going to quit. Gonna give up, be a bum. I just participate in a little bit of art therapy, and it's amazing how much better you feel. So, morning, I get the exercise, in the evening, I get the mental health.
Yeah, I really want a picture of you of that screenshot. Can you make that into a holiday greeting, Jennifer? Where it's a screenshot of your face that was just stopped on the screen?
Probably. And at least I'm wearing burgundy, and she's very green, so we're kind of Christmas colors.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about mental wellness because many people don't think about financial wellness
Mm-hmm.
and caregiving and just in general of having an emergency fund, having a debt payment plan, knowing mentally that you're going to be financially sound and that you're not going to have to dig yourself out of a hole or file bankruptcy like some caregivers have to do.
So, how do you propose people like we've hopefully made them think? Where should they start? Like when they're done listening here, don't click off just yet. Where should they start? Like maybe they've got some credit card bills, their employment is a little shaky because maybe they've had to go part-time so they can care for a grandparent or a parent. Financially they're not standing on solid ground. Where should they start to maybe start moving towards a more solid foundation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would look at is put all your cards on the table. So understand what your financial foundation is to create a roadmap. So that may be collecting your debt bills. That may be making a chart with your current bill, what you pay monthly, the interest on that bill, and when it's due each month. Having everything laid out on the table, even though it's very difficult, that's why many people don't even do the first step, is because they see all these bills that they have to pay for, and they're like, "Yowza, where do I start?"
Yeah.
So maybe
Then
having someone to encourage you or assist you through that part and keep you accountable through that portion, because seeing sometimes all those bills laid out, especially credit card bills with sometimes 18 to 20% interest, can be very daunting. So create that, see where you're at is the first step. You are, see what you have in savings, see what you have in the bank. And then from there, create a roadmap of how to get to where you want to be. So maybe your goal for this year, we're starting 2025 soon. Maybe one of your goals is I'm going to be on a clean slate before 2025 and pay off the rest of my debt. Or maybe the goal for 2025 is I'm going to pay as little, it could be as simple as I'm going to put $20 towards paying off my debt this month, or I'm going to pay the interest portion of that credit card, or I'm going to seek grants for like respite care or other ways to help substitute some of this debt to pay it off. Or I'm going to put $10 a month towards my emergency savings. I'm going to ask I'm just thinking of, ideas that you could do. I'm going to ask my care recipient, which is not always possible, to loan me the money or to help me pay off the money. As I said before, I wish I would have created some type of care agreement with my loved one. She was in a fortunate place money-wise. I wish that we had more of a clear idea of how I was being reimbursed for some of her expenses.
Would
It
she have
was
been
later.
would she have been open to that? Like my paternal grandmother, her attitude was family does for family, and she did not think she needed to reimburse my aunt or anybody that did extra stuff for her. That was just your responsibility. So would your grandmother have been open to that idea? I mean, I know that's kind of generational, so that might be a challenge for some people.
Yeah, as I'm just listing ideas, it may not be suitable for everybody. For me, I was reimbursed. It was, if I'm buying you something from Amazon, I will be reimbursed, or I'm not going to buy it because I'm not going to I'm putting my financial boundaries in place to say, I know you need those adult underwear. I know you need those wipes. I'm happy to get it for you, but these things really add up.
Yeah.
You've seen how much, it adds up. And I wasn't willing to sacrifice my financial health, my financial boundaries to be spending, $200-$300 per month on these associated costs. And so I just wish I would have had something more written down. Like after I make the purchase, this is how I will receive the money afterwards. Some type of a little bit more of accountability. Or when I take you to the doctor's office, I will be having to probably pay $5 per gallon for gas, which was during COVID. This can add up very quickly when I'm taking you from the house to the doctor's office, to the grocery store, or to the pharmacy. Like that can really add up. Um, would you be willing to pay for, 50 cents per mile? Or what is it? I don't know if it's 60 cents per mile now for reimbursement, but just something kind of in place to protect yourself because you don't need to feel like you're carrying all the burden of that. You don't need to feel that if there's money available from your care recipient, that you can't have conversations like that to place your financial boundaries. Maybe instead it's, I'm sorry, I can't take you to doctor's appointments, but I can meet you there. I can meet you at the doctor's appointment. So I'm not spending, I'm not carpooling all over the place to meet you somewhere. Or I'm only going to take you to a doctor's appointment like once a month. Maybe you book doctor's appointments back to back to back or once a week and you go that just one day and that's it, which we've done before. So there's ways to optimize it to protect yourself so that you can save money, that you can place financial boundaries to protect yourself.
I want to point out the written agreement is also really important when there's other siblings. My dad got the brilliant idea that making my sister and I co-trustees on the financial side. I was the healthcare power of attorney solo, which was fine. But because she and I don't agree on anything, he thought that would bring us together. Like anybody knows anything about family and money knows that was stupid. And she's the spendthrift, and I'm the frugal penny pincher that makes the pennies scream before they leave my fingers. And, one of the reasons, the other reason that I was like, there was a multitude of reasons why I knew mom moving into my home was absolutely not the right choice, was because, when I was doing photography, clients came to me. So mom would have needed a caregiver to manage her during the day so I could do my things. And I was not willing to battle my sister for money for that. And it was absolutely acceptable to feel that mom's finances should cover a portion of her living expenses in my house. I knew that would never fly. So I'm like, absolutely not. So I put my financial boundaries around my sister, and mom moved into memory care. So that helped a lot, but I've heard too many horror stories. I've experienced it a little bit myself, but when somebody dies, like, everybody's greedy monster comes out. That's like, yeah, I don't understand.
When there's barely any money left. It's like, okay, there's $10,000. I need all 10,000. Like I think that's why I'm saying put yourself first as a family caregiver, protect yourself. Talk to professionals, create a team. And I do a free consultation. A lot of attorneys do free consultations. Get people's advice. Information is power.
Definitely.
Because if you don't know this information and you're isolating yourself, which many caregivers do, which I understand, you may not have the information available to protect yourself. And you may be coming out of caregiving, rebuilding yourself, and not knowing where to start. Like, I've heard of people like having to live in their cars after their loved ones passing away because they were paid via government benefits. And then once those government benefits finished because their loved one passed away, they didn't have a job. They didn't have affordable housing at the time. They didn't have anything. And so they had no choice but to live in their cars. And I don't want this is why I'm saying we can't just expect the minimum anymore. We have to do much more than that because there's too many family caregivers. There's too many people getting to 65 every year that are growing old. And we need some type of protection, not only planning for yourself, but having government programs to support you, nonprofit grants to support you, employers, as we talked about early in our conversation, having employers that support you as a family caregiver that are providing programs that can help you with paid leave or provide care managers so that you can set up long-term care for your care recipient. If we had those support systems in place, we would be better caregivers for our loved ones and better protectors of our own health.
And you'd also still be a better and more loyal employee.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just the topping of the icing on the cake is being an employee that feels comfortable in the workplace and has a support system that no matter where life turns them, they have people in place to help them.
Well, you'll be happy to know that part of my talk/training for HR execs is to consider having people like yourself where the HR manager can say, "Oh, hey, Jen, okay, I get it. You're caring for your mom. Wow, that all happened really fast. Um, Here's some resources that we have vetted and we know that they're available to help you with. Here's a financial planner. You got to call Danielle. She's great with helping, family caregivers. She's not going to just, she's not the typical financial planner or, other people, but yeah, having a financial wellness coaches, planners is part of one of the things that I suggest that they offer once they understand the type of caregiving that their staff was doing. Because, many companies might not have as many people caring for older adults, but they got a lot of people caring for children. They're still going to need financial planning because, college caregiving. Ooh, I've already been through those. So that's a lot of money. And, it's important. And I think where we have past the time of work is work, home is home, and there's a wall between the two, I think that's fine as long as you have supports in place for, all the different kinds of dual responsibilities that your staff will have. So that's part of my stump speech, so to speak.
I'm sure we're going to hear more of it, and I'm excited. I'll be a listening ear, excited to hear more about your upcoming adventure.
Well, it should be interesting. I've gotten to go to 2 conferences, not HR related, but one was with Johnson& Johnson, one was with Alzheimer's Association. So I'm currently looking for Q2 for somebody to send me someplace to learn or talk or whatever where they pay. Like I said, I'm real good at pinching days, so I'm definitely that's part of my goals is more travel where I get to see things and experience things, but also spread the word as to why, it's super important that corporations understand caregiving is already affecting your bottom line. I have been saying this like since the start of the show, which is 7 years old. Still blows my mind. So if I've been yapping about this for 7 years, man, people got to they got to pay attention. I'm still surprised at how many corporations do not realize that they have this problem. It's like, could you pull your head out of the sand, please? Or maybe someplace else. Like, really, I have recently experienced 2 people who did not know what the term sandwich caregiver meant. Now, first off, I would think that if you think about it visually, caregiver sandwich, squeezed between 2 things. Okay. Like, I would think you'd be able to, like, figure out the definition just because it's a fairly descriptive term. One was basically an online news influencer is probably the term for them. And the other one is a retired friend of mine who worked for a large government laboratory, trying to keep it sort of anonymous, and did facilities management, managed people. And I just recently learned he didn't know what that phrase was. So I was like, holy crap, I've got some serious educating to do.
Are we going to switch it to like hot dog or something? Like, when can we get people to notice us? Like, that's the thing. It's when you're done with figuring out the corporate route, let me know, because I need you to start working on the financial industry, because we are so far behind.
I really think it's society. Like, how many people have you talked to where it's like, yeah, I'm the oldest daughter, so I ended up doing most of the caregiving. Guess what? Me too. My dad just assumed my mom would come move in with me. Did he ever have that conversation with me? No. Did he ever mention that to my husband? No. Just assumed. I'm like, oh, thanks. I still curse him for that one. And he's been gone for, let's see, this is coming out in March. So he will have been gone 8 years. I think that's right. Well, 2017 to 2000. Yeah, 8 years. I can do math sometimes. I can do math when it's dollar signs and addition signs. I'm real good at that one. But yeah, I think society needs basically a big slap upside the head and like, hello, you've heard about the silver tsunami for years. You've heard about caregiving. You've heard about employee retention issues. Let's put all those pieces together, okay? This is not a complicated puzzle. This is not a COVID era 1,000-piece puzzle where everything is all the same color. This is a very basic 4-piece puzzle. Put it together, and you can see that if we do not get support for family caregivers, especially from corporations, some from the government, I think they have a basic role with tax credits and other incentives that are good, like a good general support, but I do not see how even state governments can drill down to helping enough caregivers because it's so very personal. Like, you caring for your grandmother was probably different than me caring for my mom, but yet we both did kind of the same thing. You were in a different part of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I really think that that's why, corporations need to pay attention, especially because if it's already affecting their bottom line and we don't get a grip on this, here comes the worst case scary scenario is, you said caregivers that have to live in their car. Well, obviously they can't buy Acme Inc.'s widgets, and Acme Inc. is not smart enough to say, hey, this gal's got a lot of experience in a lot of different things. She can think on her feet. She can advocate. She's a good decision maker. All of the higher education that us caregivers got, whether we wanted it or not, really translates to being a really good employee for a lot of people. But you've got a resume gap, and God forbid you don't have a permanent address. Corporations are going to the AI is just going to skip right over you. And so I'm also trying to explain why they need to pay attention to the wealth of resources within individual caregivers, because we don't want to get to the point where each successive generation is more and more poor because they're caring for the generation who cared for the generation before them. And, it's like the reverse of trickle down economics, which doesn't work anyway. We don't need that. We need.
Yeah, and that's what the cycle I was talking about earlier, the life revolving terrible door. It's like going to Monsters Inc. and you open the door and it's like screaming. It's like you go through the next door and it's like just worse and worse as you get to the next one. It's a really bad cycle that I hope will be fixed within my lifetime. And
Me too.
hopefully our advocacy will change for the better, because this is a real big issue that needs to be solved.
Definitely. Because you can imagine if they claim that there's 53 million caregivers and we're at like 700, like we're almost at $1 trillion of free labor. Like, what's that going to translate to when, what do they say in 2030? I forget how many people are going to be over 65. I always have to do the math. I will not be that old in 2030, but I will be getting close. And it's like, we've already talked about how a lot of people don't identify as a caregiver. So, 53 million is an undercount. Like, when it's 100 million people, that's a third of our nation, about. I can do math. Let's just say it's 25% of our country. That's a lot of people that are having to spend their discretionary income on things other than what drives our economy. And we could have a whole debate on whether that's good or bad, or the way our economy is situated.
The next podcast episode.
And that's a whole other show.
I'll be the devil's advocate and you can tell me why it's so good. But what I think is interesting is because caregiving shifts so much, because each month could be a different set of people. Like when we just looked at the day before the pandemic started and the day after the pandemic started, it's like could be a totally completely different number of caregivers. And we often look at the statistics that are available because we have no other choice. But I really think a lot of the statistics that we're seeing are either inaccurate or unupdated. Like you were saying, the 70% of people who need long-term care. I really wonder if that's been a really, I wouldn't say old statistic, but old to me is like a couple years old, because things have changed so much since the pandemic. It might be way higher than 70%. It might be way higher than 53 million caregivers need support. It might be way higher. Like when we look at the I think it was from AARP, caregivers on average spend about $7,000 a year of care cost. I'm sure that's way higher than that.
It probably is an average, and those of us in states like California that has like the highest gas prices because we have those gas taxes, versus, we could just drive over the border to Nevada and it's like, holy crap, gas is $1 cheaper over here. So you driving your grandmother around, my aunt driving my grandmother around, her mother-in-law, is different in California than it would be for somebody in, say, Nevada or wherever else gas is cheaper. I mean, 49 other states pretty much. And the cost of living is cheaper. So when you average it out, it's still a problem. I think it's about $800 a month on average. That's probably low as well because people don't think about, well, we went to the doctor, then we went out to lunch. Well, you don't factor in lunch because, like, you need to eat.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, I think all of those numbers are low, and it scares me when they explode and people are like, oh my God, we thought it was 53 million, not 153 million. That's where you and I are trying really hard to be like, hello, we're sounding the alarm over here. Please pay attention.
Yeah, it's even scarier on if you're looking in the financial industry, because a lot of financial advisors are relying on a amazing study. It's a Genworth study, so it pretty much averages out based off of your state of how much long-term care would cost per year. It's literally the foundation that pretty much every advisor uses to calculate long-term care. To me, I don't use it. And I'll tell you why. I think it's a representation number. It's a number that's available. It's a number that's better than nothing. But what I tell clients is go visit assisted living communities around you, interview care agencies around you, get accurate numbers. One, you'll get an idea of what care communities are around you, what you're getting, what are you getting for your dollar's worth? Because it's not going to be as much as you think it is. The $35 an hour that you're paying, you're probably not going to get the full value out of that. I'm sorry. It's just usually it's very unlikely.
Fair.
See, track the smells, track the environment, see how people like it, see the manager staff. You don't want to be in the care community that everybody in the community knows is bad. And if you don't have that written down, like where you want to live, where your care community is, then none of your family members are going to know where to put you. And so that's a lot of people say, I just want to live at home. Sure, live at home, but have a backup plan B. And that's why I suggest people to tour is not only get an accurate number, but have a plan B in place, because you don't want to be in the community that no one likes. And then as far as care agencies, and you can interview them and get accurate numbers. In that time, yes, of course, probably the cost of long-term care is going to increase every year, like it does on average 5%. But at least today, you have accurate numbers. So I can create an accurate plan, not a average number that may be totally different in your community, or maybe you want the high scale care community. Maybe you visit all these care communities and you discover that you don't like anything around you. You want to go private, and private might cost 2 or 3 times more than those averages, because again, it's an average. So now you're estimating what you want, what makes you happy and feel good, because you want to die with dignity. You want to die with love. Most of us do. At least that's hopefully many people's goal. And you want to be in an environment that's comfortable for you. And that may not be, you're not average. So don't use average numbers.
Well, I can tell you my mom's memory care cost from March 2017 to March 2020 was just over $250,000. And she fell also, like your grandmother, broke her leg at the start of the pandemic. She was reevaluated because it was the month that she moved in, so that was standard. And her monthly fee was going to go from $5,600 to $7,200. And I am 1,000% convinced she is the only one that's going to convince me otherwise, that she had a moment of clarity and said, there's this virus thing going around. Nobody can come visit me. I can't go to the park and watch kids. That was the activity that she and I settled on that made her happy and didn't make me crazy. And this fee, no, we're not doing that, because my mom passed away in the afternoon of March 31st, 2020, and that fee was to take effect April 1st. She gave us about 12 and a half hours of leeway. So that's why I'm convinced she had a moment of clarity and said, nope, not doing that. I'm out.
Yeah, I've had many clients where they've gotten that slip of paper where it says, this is the fee increase. And you're like, yowza, this is much more than the average 5% that what we estimate in. And now what do we do? Do we negotiate? Do we move them someplace else?
And her fees basically went up. What was that? That's like almost $2,000 because I should do that math. Because she went from ambulatory with no aids and mostly feeding herself and mostly able to use the restroom to being bedbound, losing the ability to feed herself and all that stuff. And the memory care administrator was very conservative. If there was a question between A and B fee, she always went with the lowest fee. So negotiating probably would have been a waste of time because there was really no arguing with her assessment. It's like, I can't argue that she's bedbound. I can't argue that she's needing to be fed more often. This is just how this disease goes. And so we missed the super ugly end of bedbound and all that stuff because she decided she was done. And we didn't have to pay $7,200 a month, which would have been harder because we rented out her house for $3,500 plus her Social Security, plus a little bit from my parents' financial planner deposited into the trust account. She had plenty of money. It just required managing, which I was really good at. I stressed all the time about her running out of money and her ending up in my house.
So that's a scary thought, especially when, like, I think of it almost as a cruise. When you pay for a cruise, you're paying per person. Usually that comes with some place to rest your head, food, which could be a buffet or someplace just a table. But you're not thinking about the extra things. Like maybe you want alcohol. Maybe you want Wi-Fi. Maybe you want to do tours when you get off the boat. And so when we think about these care communities, which I'm sure you've talked about in other podcasts, what you think you're paying, what the starting price that they give you is not what you're probably going to be paying monthly. It's probably depending on what their care needs are. You're probably going to be paying much more than just the basic rate.
Yeah, for mom's care home, she was assessed before she moved in, and then they told us how much, and it was written down. So I think there were 6 levels of care, and I think she was at 1 or 2. I think she went from like 2 to 4. So when she broke her leg, she jumped significantly. But you kind of knew what to expect. So there wasn't like a basic rate, and then, well, if you want like help eating or you need help to the bathroom, it was all based on the assessment, which is why they reassessed her every year. So like I said, she moved in March, so they reassessed her in March. So I guess it was a good thing she broke her leg in March. But yeah, that's how all of the ones around me work that I'm aware of. But see, now we know that there might be something different. So there's a lot to think about. I think we've given everybody a buffet of food to think about.
Hopefully not too much. We don't want any like minds blown today.
Yeah, no, I think,
or headaches.
No, really. But we're all kind of in this boat. When we did our trust, I felt stupid that we were, early 50s for me. And I was like, man, we're so far behind. And our attorney's like, no, actually, you're kind of ahead of the curve. And I was like, oh, that's not cool. And for those people who might be new to the show, my sticking point was, as I mentioned, my daughter's an only child with an autoimmune disease. And her husband is from a family of people who wouldn't know what a financial planner is if you hit them upside the head with it. They were always in financial distress. And when the lawyer said, what happens if your daughter dies before you? And my response, jokingly to some respect, was, well, that's just a terrible question. And he's like, I know, but it's one you have to answer. And at first I didn't have an answer because I started way overthinking, well, if my son-in-law gets the money and his family finds out about it and that greedy green-eyed monster starts coming out with all his, his 4 siblings and blah, 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 especially the sister that was caring for his parents. I'm like, that just seemed almost like a burden. And then one day it just kind of hit me. It's like, A, I'll be dead. And B, dude, if you pull something stupid with this money, I'm coming back to haunt you. And that was the end of that decision. It's like, you really don't have to overthink this stuff that much, because once you're gone, you have no control over it anyway. And you just have to hope that people do the right thing. So planning ahead is good.
Conversations in place so that your wishes get acknowledged.
Yep.
But if you're not planning, if you're not having those conversations, then you might lead yourself to a path of, I wouldn't say doom, but path of uncertainty in your life. And that's the biggest mistake people make, is don't communicate, don't plan.
So we want to communicate and we want to plan. And we want to thank Danielle for being the first financial planner to be on Fading Memories in 7 years.
Hopefully I lived to your expectations of what a financial planner should talk like on this podcast.
Well, I think the problem is all the ones I asked to be on the show have not been had not been caregivers at that point in their life. So they come from a different perspective than you do. And so you were just the right person. And I really appreciate everything you did for National Caregiver Month with all those videos. I know that was like a huge, huge amount of time. And I think your household all got sick, so that doesn't help. You guys have to go back on the LinkedIn and Instagram and X, I think is where they're all posted, and look at everybody's videos and hear everybody's stories about the financial challenges that caregiving created in their lives. And don't be like us.
If that's the motto of this podcast, don't be like us, then I feel pretty good.
I agree. Once again, so I thank you, and I thank the listeners for hanging in there. This is a slightly longer than normal, but I think this was an excellent conversation, and I'm sure you got good stuff out of it, because I know I did, and I'm on the other side, so it's always good when I learn new things too.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.